We're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first panel of the Outside Our Bubble series, where our first topic is Unlearning Racism, where we will talk about systemic racism and the effects of it that we see in our communities today. Today, we plan on discussing some of the history surrounding systemic racism, what allyship looks like both in person and online, and what it means to move forward with this dialogue and discussion to forge a better future for ourselves and our communities. So I am Lindsay. I am going to be our moderator for today's discussion. Very quickly about me, I graduated from Walnut High School in 2014. I took part in the drama program and the spoken word team on campus. And today I am joined by an incredibly talented group of panelists that I'm going to introduce one by one. To my left, it might be different for everybody, but when I say your name, go ahead and just raise your hand so we know who is who. So first off, AJ Culpepper. He graduated from the class of 2015 and participated in choir as well as track and field. He is currently an audio engineer and production manager for Spaceship Studios, where he works with both hip hop and R&B artists around the country. Michelle Chang, she graduated from the class of 2016 and participated in publications, Simple Faith and United Med. She recently graduated from Stanford and aspires to become a mental health researcher practitioner devoted to decolonized mental health care that empowers community existent knowledge. Dee Hankins graduated class of 2005, where he was involved with track and field. Now he travels the country as an inspirational speaker to help students focus on their resilience and what that means to be resilient today in America. And finally, last but not least, Nicci Carrasco graduated class of 2014 and participated in soccer, cheer, and theater. She works in higher education as a higher education administrator at UC Berkeley, where she focuses on pursuing equality in education, especially for students of color. Thank you guys so very much for taking the time to share your stories and your perspectives and knowledge on these topics. And thank you again to everybody who is tuning in with us, the students of Walnut High School, alumni, current students, etc., and people of the community, because without you, we wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place. As a reminder to all of you who are watching, you can participate in this conversation as well. You can DM the name that says send questions here, and they will funnel all of those questions over to me as the moderator, and we can ask. Perfect. The thumbs up is on the send questions here tab. You can send questions to that account, and then they'll send it to me so I can ask those questions. Don't worry, the questions will be anonymous, so you don't have to worry about your name being mentioned by asking a question. Finally, just very quickly to mention, the first 45 minutes of this discussion are going to be recorded. The last 15 are not, in case anybody decides to ask a little bit more of a serious question that they want to have brought up. Now, without further ado, let's jump into our conversation. We want to start with gaining an understanding of what systemic racism is. It's a term that has been used a lot in the last 2 weeks or so, and it's still a little bit confusing for some. So can each of our panelists explain from their own stories how they've seen systemic racism, what it is, and what it looks like to you as a person of color?
All right, well, I'll go ahead and get it started.
Thank you, AJ.
My name is AJ Culpepper. My artist name is AJ Vibes, and I'm just want to thank everyone for allowing all of us to be up here today to have a conversation about unlearning racism. The question you asked was talking specifically about systematic versus systemic racism. Is that what we're talking about right now, currently? Jared? Yeah? Okay, for sure. I think a good way to understand it is to really define the two terms. This is the definition according to Google and the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Systematic is a methodical and intentional in-plan or procedure done in accordance to a fixed plan or system. And systemic is a quality inherent to a system, one that is not always intentional, but still tangible. And when we apply these things to racism, when we're talking about systematic racism, that specifically has to deal with I guess, the laws and the specific verbiage that specifically deals with a particular group of people. For my own behalf, I guess I could talk about for Black people, this would be covered in the Jim Crow laws that were present in the South, or the 13th Amendment when it comes to how it still perpetuates today through the prison system. And systemic necessarily has to deal with the way that a lot of the qualities that are inherent to minorities or people of color, you're talking about how those laws affect us in different ways based off of a group of people that may fall into a specific social economic status. Because just because something is not in a specific verbiage dealing with a particular group of people does not mean that the effects of those cannot be felt by that same specific group of people.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on what AJ just said, which I wholeheartedly agree with, I think that one way that I've been able to like clearly see and understand systemic racism is understanding that certain systems in our society were not built for someone like me. I'm multiracial and multi-ethnic. When I was at Walnut, I just identified as Latinx because it was easier. But specifically when you think about institutions like education that is primarily white, was primarily white from the majority of history. And if you think about institutions like the police that were meant to police Black people post or during slavery, I think that that's a really good way to view it, is that certain situations, certain institutions were set up for someone like me to fail or not make it that far.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about a plan put in place to hold on, I think I froze. Sorry. Okay, good. All right. We're talking about a plan put in place to further a part of the population from anyone else. You know, when we talk about, especially when we're talking about racism, and you can see it through just certain things like college enrollment, the wealth gap, the net income, when we're talking about property ownership, when we're talking about businesses, when we're talking about these things, you can see a huge separation between a certain group and other groups. And so when all those are put in place systematically in a country where, you know, there's a assembly line of things you need to do before, you know, you get from point A to point B, such as elementary school, middle school, high school, college, getting a job and progressing in that job, buying things, like all those things are systematic. And that system wasn't built for people of color in this country. We can follow it, don't get me wrong. There's people who have followed it, but it wasn't built for people of color in this country.
Absolutely. Thank you, all of you, for sharing with that wealth of information. And our next question is kind of based off of that. Let's talk some examples of things that we do see in our communities, that we see even today, that uphold this system that we're currently discussing. Dee, you mentioned the school system. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then this is also a great jumping off point to discuss the protests that are currently happening in our country right now as well, if any of you would like to speak to that.
Yeah, especially the school system. School system, I think, is one of the biggest red flags. And we go back to, in order to understand the school system, we have to understand who's in charge of the school system, right? When we talk about education, if we go back to just school in general, public school in general, and because we're still talking about systematic, you know, racism, systemic racism, is most schools, public schools, are funded by housing, right? Like housing tax, property tax, okay? If you have schools or neighborhoods where, you know, housing is great, you know, people make a decent amount of money, your schools are gonna fare better off because they have more activities, they have money for activities, they have money for upkeep, they have like the necessities, you know. And we go back to Jim Crow, what AJ was talking about when, and segregation, okay? And we talk about redlining and things like that. And redlining was an act of, literally drawing a red line to where people of color could buy houses and what neighborhoods they can settle in, and versus white people, okay? So again, like a perfect example, we have Walnut. A couple miles down the road, you have Pomona. Walnut and Pomona are very, very different cities and very, very different schools with very, very different outcomes for education, graduation rates, so on and so forth. Furthermore, when segregation happened, when people said, okay, we want integration, all right, segregation is wrong. We kind of woke up, and we wake up very, very slowly, right? Segregation is wrong, okay? There are people that are still teaching today, right, that did not want segregation. I don't want Black kids at our school. I don't want Mexicans at our school. I don't want, whatever derogatory name they could call other people non-white. We don't want them at our school, okay? But it is what it is, all right? It happened. We made it happen. Those teachers and principals and deans and administrators, superintendents, they didn't leave because integration happened. They weren't so upset with integration that they were like, you know what? I'm leaving my job. I'm going to go do something else. They stayed, right? So those teachers, and there's videos that you can see and documentaries of Black kids walking to school where parents are spitting at them, putting hoses at them, throwing food at them, Those are teachers now, like today, in today's classroom, in today's administration, in today's like education department, when we talk about state government and things like that. So those ideologies about how they felt back then are very apparent in schools now, with graduation rates, with dropout rates, with suspension rates, disciplinary rates, and they all favor, or all, the majority of these kids that are getting suspended, that are dropping out of school, that aren't graduating, that have low grades, that need the most help, are primarily students of color. Even when we talk about a place as dope as Walnut High School, right? Walnut High School, high academic school, but if you look at the kids that are getting sent to, when I went there, it was Del Paso. Now it's I think it's
yeah, they changed the name.
Yeah,
it's in the same place.
Yeah, same place. West, or something with a W. I forgot. All the people from Walnut are probably like on my throat right now. But if you go to that school, you can see primarily people of color, right? So there's this inherent dilemma and this problem that I think people are starting to see, especially in the education system, where, yeah, there is an unfair amount. Why? Is it because Black kids aren't as smart? Is it because Black kids don't work hard enough? Is it because Black kids, just, hey, school, I can't do it, I'm out, and that, if your thought process is that way, that would be wrong. That would be completely wrong, So, but there is this thing, this barrier that's in the way that people of color do feel at school. And it goes back to segregation. It goes back to Jim Crow. It goes back to the history of America when we talk about slavery.
Just to hop onto that, Dee, with what you were saying about the separation between the two and the things that stayed even after segregation, even after integration happened. The education, the process, the content that were in the books that we were studying, that didn't go away either. There was a minimal talk or explanation or teaching about the things that happened during that time, talking about segregation and integration, stuff like that, and around slavery. It was largely glorified as a time that people want to talk about for the Civil War, that it had nothing to do with slavery, but that's not the case whatsoever. As we can see, it was a very stable place for the South to have that as an economic factor, but also the ideological factor that people who look a certain way, who came from a certain place, are better than people who don't look like that. And they continued that. They continued that for a very, very long time. And we see the effects of it today because of the redlining, as you spoke to, but even how it affects us today with the amount of students that are in the class. I can speak for myself as saying that a lot of the times when I was in class, even in college as well as in high school, you didn't see a lot of Black kids in the class. You didn't see a lot of us in there. And when we were in there, we felt good. It felt great to be among a lot of other people that felt and looked the same way as you. And that's not something that someone can always speak to. That's something that's people who are white can go into a class and they're always going to feel accepted. They're going to feel catered to. They're going to feel like that information is specifically for them. Everything that they hear, they're not offended by. They can go through their day and it's completely fine. But for me, being Black and not seeing anybody else in the class that looks like me doesn't make me feel like I can succeed. Seeing people who are teaching me that aren't Black doesn't make me feel like I can get to a position to teach other people. Looking at the context and the books that we're reading, with one chapter in the entire history book that deals with the amount of tragedy and complete systematic and systemic racism that's existed for years, even on an ideological side, is not talked about. And you just have to, as a student, when you're there, you have to kind of just take all that in, and you got to deal with all the other emotional factors that go with that as well, because it's hard to feel like you can express yourself. And I feel like that's a very big part of education, is that part of being able to feel as if you can express yourself. You're supposed to be able to grow. You're supposed to be able to have ideas and get those ideas challenged and find a way to see your way through those things. But you can't do that if everything else is telling you that either that you don't exist, or that what you're dealing with is not a problem. If you're saying that it's only individual, it's within yourself, you can't ever get to a point where you can acknowledge those things. And that's a big part of it. If you don't ever acknowledge the things that have happened, you're not going to be able to develop as a student, as a human being. You're not going to be able to develop if you don't acknowledge or have a place where people acknowledge things that are affecting you.
Yeah. And that goes both ways. That goes for Black students, and that goes for non-Black students. Like if you're not being fed it, it doesn't affect you. If you're not learning about it, it doesn't affect you. Therefore, you don't see it. And that's why you can see that right now, like out there, people just don't understand. Why are people yelling Black Lives Matter? Of course, or whatever, because they don't see it. Everything, like AJ said, everything that we have learned in this country since the time we could read on till after college has been centrally focused on the goal of America, right? Which is capitalism, right? You learn economics, you learn communism is bad. You don't want to be like those communists and whatever, you learn that stuff. And you learn, hey, Abraham freed the slaves. We're good. Martin Luther King took a walk. We're good. Now on to mathematics, and that's it. So, but we know, as Black folks, we know that there's a much deeper, more evil, more sinister couple of 100,000 layers beyond Abraham freed the slave. And that's, you can ask anybody, right? They talk about Abraham Lincoln, this whole hero Superman came in, freed the slaves, done deal. No, he didn't.
Yeah, he wasn't an abolitionist until towards the end of his presidency, which is crazy that that's what we're taught. We're taught a colonized version of history. And
think about how we hail George Washington as, this great American leader. We, unless you dive into it, I just learned myself, right? Because, a big thing that I learned in school was, especially in elementary school, his teeth were made of wood. Which is in elementary school, you're like, that's crazy because old people. I'm just now learning that his teeth were made from teeth of the mouth of slaves. They're not why are they not teaching your, second grader that, right?
Let's continue with this trend on education specifically, because I think that's where we're at, and to kind of make it a dual-sided conversation from Michelle and Nicci. We want to talk about specifically at Walnut. What does that kind of community of students look like in relation to, from your personal perspectives, in understanding the Black community, say, from a state of your own privileges, the state of your own perspectives. And then on the other side of that, AJ and Dee, what was it like being a Black student at Walnut while you were there? If you guys want to start with that.
Yeah, so is the question kind of about how we understand where we fit in with the movement for Black lives? Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna
I'm happy to start.
make our way towards.
Yeah, sorry, I got muted.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a really great question and something I'm definitely still trying to learn as well. I think what I want to offer is that our positionality, or basically how we position ourselves as non-Black people of color, is really key. Like, I don't think now is the time for me as a non-Black person of color to be centering my experiences or, trying to prove that I'm the most woke or most educated. I think now is definitely the time to be like amplifying and supporting Black voices and leadership that have already been doing the work. And yeah, I think at Walnut, I know there are so many things that I've learned now that I, like 5 years ago, definitely had no idea of or had no language for. Even when there were experiences where I experienced racism or things that didn't quite sit right with me, I often didn't have the language for why it felt wrong or where I fit in with it. So I think finding language and finding words for trusting your intuitions as a person of color and trusting your intuitions that what's going on or what you're experiencing is valid and it's coming from somewhere that is speaking to truth is really important. So yeah, I think especially thinking about the Walnut context, I really encourage folks to be listening well to your peers who are Black, amplifying their voices and leadership, and asking basically who's already doing the work around this and how do I have the capacity to offer concrete support and help to them? How can I partner with them? I organize very closely with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated folks. And, how I started doing that was really just being in relationship and being in collaboration with the incarcerated artists who were already doing the work, and seeing where my role and my voice could fit in with amplifying their voices.
Yeah, as a Latinx woman, I have to acknowledge the fact that, like, demographically, the Asian population and the Latinx population at Westmont have always been really prevalent, at least as long as I've been familiar with the school. I think that there's a lot of anti-Blackness rooted in both of those communities, like specifically when you think about like women using bleach on their skin, or just like the prevalence of within the Latinx community saying the N-word, which is very harmful and very dehumanizing. Something that I've acknowledged that my experience is different from a Black person's. And something that I've tried to be more helpful with is acknowledging when someone is teaching me something, specifically when that is a Black individual and their community is being hunted after, saying thank you for the fact that they've expended some emotional labor by teaching me and by being there, or by sending me resources. And kind of like what was just said is acknowledging the movements that are already happening and saying, how can I support this? I think personally, when I was at Walnut, I remember learning about the civil rights movement and slavery and wondering, where do I fit into all of this? I'm not a Black woman, but I am a brown woman. Where does that put me? And it wasn't until I graduated and went to a predominantly white institution that I actually learned that we should be allies together. We should acknowledge the overlap within our communities, specifically the Afro-Latinx community. So saying like, how can I support you? And also just, if you do have a Black loved one, not constantly leaning on them and refusing to use Google at every turn. Look things up on your own. You guys are students. I think that that's something that you need to take with you the rest of your lives.
Absolutely. And AJ, Dee, would you like to speak towards your experiences being a Black student at Walnut?
Yeah, absolutely. We got in trouble a lot, to be honest, man. So it was different. I think it's the same demographics. It was a little bit more The Asian population was the majority, then it was the white population, then it was the Lat population, and it was this little bitty, percentage of the Black population. And I specifically remember being in school, we got called into the office all of the time, not for fighting, not for anything. It's just what we used to do. So, anybody in like the 01 to 05 era would know that, there's a little group of people. We used to come up with everything. We used to beatbox in the middle of lunchtime. We used to hang take like pizza boxes and put holes in them and take the foil from the pizza and play basketball. And we used to just have fun. However, we were always targeted as troublemakers all of the time, right? And that was kind of like depressing. It wasn't all my friends that I know, I have 6 really good friends. We all graduated with great GPAs, went on to college, never been in trouble, no fights, no nothing like that. But yet we're the ones always getting pulled into the office because of our lunchtime activities. Because, I remember one time getting called to the office, said, you know what, you drew a big crowd and we thought that you guys were enticing fighting, right? And what we were really doing was freestyle rapping, you know what I'm saying? And people just enjoyed it. So it felt like the talents that we had, the skills that we had, the fun-loving nature that we had was problematic. And if that is part of your personality, if that is part of who you are, and yet that's always being shut down, you do feel a certain type of way. You feel like, man, what do you want me to do? I get good grades, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm doing what the status quo at Walnut is, which is academics. Let's be honest, right? It's academics. Not only that, we were all athletes, you know what I'm saying? So not only were we providing a service in athletics for our school and raising money for boosters and doing all this other stuff, but being ourselves, being our, our loud, as some people say, vibrant selves were against the status quo. And because of that, a part of you had to be silenced because that part, that fun-loving, that, friendly nature was always looked at as problematic.
What about you, AJ?
Tacking on to that, and I wholeheartedly understand exactly where you're coming from with that in terms of the troublemaker scene, and the term that got attached to something that has no reference for what it would mean to another person. What I dealt with specifically when I was there, I guess, and I think that a lot of people can speak to this, if you are a person of color in any type of community, you're dealing with microaggressions. The microaggressions that exist are not necessarily explicit forms of racism, if you would like to say so, but they feel exactly the same because you in turn have to change yourself and reinterpret what the person is trying to do or what they're saying in order to calm yourself into a place that isn't seen as aggressive. Because the moment you get defensive about something, you are seen as the aggressor. And that's problematic within itself because we shouldn't have to always adapt ourselves to deal with someone else's ignorance. And it's very specific because I can speak for myself. My hair when I was at high school always changed all the time. I could come in with an afro, I could come in with cornrows, I could come in with twists, whatever. Didn't matter. Soon as I walked in, someone was trying to put their hands in my hair. And that's not okay. I'm not a pet. I'm not an object. I'm not something that you have ownership of, but that's something that people feel is okay. They ask you about, like, oh, what is it like to go to Black church or whatever that's supposed to mean? What is it like to do Black and then something else, the activity? Because for whatever that means, it doesn't mean the same thing to you. And we see these things as just being inquisitive. They're in a frame of mind where you're not trying to be disrespectful, but you have to understand that that's not your decision to make, whether you saying it's disrespectful or not. It's the person receiving it, how that is interpreted, and how you can educate yourself to see when you do these microaggressions is just to ask, ask or look, like just like Nicci said, search up on Google. Or if you have someone that is Black or a person of color that you are close to, just ask them if they feel okay with that. I can guarantee you they'll give you this most straight up answer and you won't have to ask again because it's not how you feel about the situation. It's about how that person is receiving it. And that goes into a lot of other conversations about, saying the N-word, because it's not like hip hop music just got popular. It's been around for a very long time, in the way that people would feel like they get to use it because it's in a positive demeanor does not necessarily mean that that person is receiving it positively. Nor does it mean that you, if you're not Black saying it, nor does that mean that you have that relationship with that other person to say it. Because you can't go around and nitpick everyone in their relationship they have with other people. But I can speak for myself that there are people that I know that I can call by a certain name, whether that be a nickname that I have for them. And that's a relationship that I built up with them. But you can't assume that relationship with everybody else. And what you do when you want to, decide to do some of these things that you feel aren't aggressive, that aren't disrespectful, you are assuming a particular relationship you have with the person. And when you assume that that person will feel disrespected because if they don't have that relationship with you, that's not going to be received well. Another thing I can speak to is always feeling to have to, find your own lane to shine bright, because doing the things that we felt were normal, like, playing basketball in the middle of the quad, or, just things that you wouldn't are harmless in their intent and in their nature and in the result thereof. You have to find a way to shine, whether that be, and it's always in the stereotypical way. You have to be good at basketball. You got to be able to run fast. You got to be able to sing good. You got to be able to do all these things that are stereotypical to Black culture, because we have, as a culture, we have an appreciation for Black people, but we're never going to give that credit due to them. And that's when you get into the lane of appropriation, because there are certain things that Black people do within their culture. I feel as if, in terms, as I'm studying music in college and getting into world music and ethnomusicology, we learned a lot about the rhythms that developed out of Africa, and a lot of where that the music that we listen to today derived from, in terms of the rhythmic qualities and things like that. And you understand that there are things that we do as a culture that don't necessarily mean that you get to assume that we have those things about us already, because we're still individual people. We still have our individual elements to ourselves, and you can't just group us all into a bubble and say that we all are troublemakers, or that we all are, track stars, basketball stars, good singers, or we all are, gangbangers, drug dealers, or thieves and stuff like that. Those layers that come with it all result in the same chain when we're talking about systematic and systemic racism, because we've evolved so much to a point now where certain things that are racist are seen as okay because of how we've normalized. We've gotten to a point where certain things don't necessarily matter anymore because they're not as bad as seeing someone tragically die in a video. If it's not that, then it's not racism. If it's not this person directly calling you this, then it's not racist. That's what people want you to believe. But there are so many layers to this. And right now, it's a great time in our country because we are at the tip of the iceberg. It's just peaked above the water. And now everyone's crashing into it. But I can guarantee you there's a bunch of stuff under that too that we haven't touched yet that we're going to have to get to. And just because, Black Lives Matter isn't trending anymore, just because, rest in peace, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor isn't trending anymore, doesn't mean that it's over. Just because people's feeds go back to normal does not mean that it's over. Even after all of this goes back to normal and we're in a situation where we're not directly looking at our phones all the time because we're not quarantined inside of our rooms, racism is still going to exist, and we have to move together to figure out a way to acknowledge all the things. It starts with acknowledgement. Then we can start to build upon the solutions that are there. And just like Michelle said about allyship and about amplifying the voices around you that are already doing the work, these things have been talked about. These things have been dealt with. These solutions have systematic place and systemic ways of moving forward that we've already determined, because this conversation started long before I was born. This conversation started long before any of us were born, and it's going to continue to happen because we still have to find a way to get to a position where everyone can feel equal. Everyone feels that they have the equity around the country, around the world, because that's what we're striving towards. It's not Martin Luther King did a walk and now slavery and now racism's over. It's not Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves and now slavery is over. Now we're good. It's not President Obama got elected and now you guys have a black president and now it's okay, we're good. It's not that. It's a continual journey, continual walk, a continual stride, hand in hand with each other, acknowledging our past, acknowledging that the things that we have done as a country to diminish these things and trying to move forward with that in our minds. It's not, I don't see color. It's that I understand, I try to understand where you're coming from. I recognize where you are coming from as an individual, and I want to help you move forward.
And the key word in there is definitely want, right? Yeah. There has to be a want, and it shouldn't be force-fed. Like I feel like, and maybe AJ can attest to this, I feel like I'm force-feeding knowledge to people that I should not have to be educating about. You know, you have to want to learn this stuff. Something that he really said that really struck a nerve was normalize, right? You guys got to understand, in America, racism is normal, right? It's a normal thing. So you may not think you're racist. You may say, I got black friends. I have a black spouse. I'm not racist. But you got to understand that racism has been programmed into every crevices in this country, from media to newsprint to radio to appropriation. We talk about Elvis. Who wrote those songs? How many songs did he steal? Right? Who didn't get the credit? We're just learning in 2018, 17 about the Hidden Figures movie, about the 3 black women that played such an important role of sending us into space. Why was that hidden for so long? You know, why are we just learning about that in 2018? So there has to be this want to dig deeper and say, man, okay, you're right. Maybe there's obviously something wrong, because we keep having, somebody had mentioned, we keep throwing these fits, right? Black Lives Matters keeps having these tantrums, per se, right? For lack of better words. And why? Why? Some people say, oh, it's just, I was reading some nonsense the other day. Well, black people only protest when a white person kills them. What? Nah. You know what I'm saying? We've been protesting silently for a very, very long time. We've been asking these questions for a very, very long time. And so when we finally get out there to protest and riot, or not riot, I'm not for that, but when we got to get out there and protest and try to spread awareness, now not only that, but we're villainized. We're not looking at why we're out there. We're looking at how we're out there, right? So
yeah, let's start talking about allyship in particular, how we can be better allies in a time like this, where there are protests happening, where there's a lot of information coming on out there, and to help a lot of these students who are with us today, like, understand being better allies, not only from a perspective of being a black person, but also being another person of color, to help engage in that conversation. I think both AJ and Dee, all of you, bring up this really strong idea of unconscious biases that we all have, and diving into understanding why those are there in the school system and history they were taught, and how we can start to deconstruct them moving forward in order to have better conversations like the one we're having now. So I'm going to jump to a question that was given by one of the students in here regarding allyship. And also, we also want to say we're going to record the whole hour, because the conversation has been that amazing. Thank you, guys. So the question is, to be a better ally, what can we do if we see or hear another student on campus saying something racist, whether it was intentional or not?
Yeah, stand up, right? You have to, it's not enough to be not racist, right? It's not enough to be, I'm just not racist. We have to create a culture of anti-racism where racism is seen, is uncomfortable. There's a lot of that going on right now because people are comfortable with it. There's no repercussions. right? We have to change that culture to an anti-racist culture to where people feel uncomfortable. Because this is the honest truth. We're not going to get rid of racist people. That's not happening, right? There's always going to be racist people, just like there's always going to be bad this, bad that, people doing this. There's always going to be that, because we're human beings, and human beings are not perfect. So we're always going to do something wrong or whatever. However, if you make it uncomfortable for people to be racist in this society, if you make it difficult for them to thrive in the society by calling it out, right, and kind of getting rid of this whole snitches get stitches mentality, because I think that's a big problem too. I don't want to say nothing because I don't want to be seen as a, when it comes to racism, letting racism happen is more destructive than anything you can ever do, right? Because racism is like this virus, okay? If I get away with it and somebody sees that, guess what they're gonna start doing? Well, that's okay because my teacher did it, nothing happened to her, so now I can do it. Well, she did it, well, he did it, well, they did it, so I'm gonna do it. And we see that now. So whenever you see something that is racist in nature, whether it's on purpose or whether it's on accident, say something. That's not cool. We don't do that here. We don't say that here. We don't act like that here, you know? And on top of that, when I was learning Spanish, somebody told me the best way to learn Spanish is to go to Spain, full immersion. If you want to learn about how to be a better ally for Black people, go talk to Black people, read Black books, involve yourself into Black culture outside of hip hop, outside of, you know, these things. Go visit these people, you know, go visit poverty stricken neighborhoods. Sit in a town hall meeting, see what they're asking, see what the questions are, and then figure out ways how you can solve those problems. Each one of us have the power to solve one problem. Right? It may not be racism on a large scale, right? I may not see it in my lifetime, but I can at least clear the runway for my kids when they grow up, right? And that's attacking one thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. How do we have those? So more specifically now, and this question is directed at Michelle and Nicci. In your own communities, the Latinx and East Asian communities as well, having those tough conversations with people of those communities who don't quite get it. How do we approach that?
Yeah, I think kind of connected to what Dee was saying is that if someone of a different racial or ethnic background than you is being targeted by a microaggression or something that's more outright racist, something that I constantly lean back on is, what do you mean by that? Asking someone to unpack what they're saying, and eventually they see that it's kind of in a line of stereotypes that are harmful. Another aspect too is that if someone who you're not necessarily on the same plane of power, saying something like, hope you don't mean that the way it sounds, especially when it's someone that's like your elder or a teacher or something like that. I think that like it allows them to really internalize it and possibly approach you later. Who knows? Sorry, Jared, can you rephrase the question?
Sure. So we want to discuss specifically what happens if you feel your family and your friends of your same ethnic backgrounds are behaving in this way. How can we use those discussions to forward their mentalities?
Yeah, so specifically within the Latinx community, there's a lot of colorism. There are white Latinx people, white passing Latinx people. And I think that that's something that, like, personally I've had to combat. I have a lot of family from like more conservative areas of the South. And having those conversations can be really frustrating, especially when there are a lot of like built upon prejudices. While I think it's helpful to try to engage in those conversations, as long as you and the other person, specifically if this is a family member, are on the same page of like, I want to learn, I think that that's the best way to start a conversation. And something that ultimately needs to be normalized is being comfortable with learning and saying, oh, I was wrong about that, or oh, I shouldn't have said that. or that's why I shouldn't be saying the N-word as someone that's not Black.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off of what Nicci's saying, I think that's so important, like remembering even where I personally have started in my education, and like the fact that change and continued education are possible even in my own life is a great starting point and framework to enter into these conversations with your loved ones. I think something that I've found comes up time and time again in my own Chinese American context is the question of like life experience. And specifically in my circles, whenever I try to have conversations with older loved ones, a lot of my older loved ones survived the Cultural Revolution in China and all sorts of state-sanctioned violence and trauma. And so the things that I'm talking about to them can sometimes be dismissed pretty easily as like, oh, you don't understand because you haven't lived through this, this, and that. And I think I've really needed to personally understand where my loved ones are coming from, what are the traumas and contexts that they carry coming into these conversations, and understanding that a lot of their perspectives have also kind of originated from this need to really just survive, which is all they've known. So in these conversations, I've had to first acknowledge those contexts that my loved ones are coming from and ask them to also hold alongside that the very real anti-Blackness and violence that they also need to kind of inwardly engage with for our collective liberation. I'll just say that I think engaging with these conversations is important because not because we're trying to be like heroes or be these kind and generous people that like are doing the right thing to help, but actually because our liberation is tied to Black liberation. As a Hakka Chinese woman, I'm not free until we're all free, as long as the systems of white supremacy and anti-Blackness are still upheld. So I think if you're entering these conversations knowing you're here because you want to work alongside and with Black communities and working together for our collective liberation, I think that's a really great place to start, as you also check in with yourself and your emotional capacity.
Yeah, definitely. Just like for my own personal experience, my mother is white passing. She has red hair. She just, and she really shares that identity, even though she's like a very recent immigrant. Her and I have very different experiences. And I think that it's okay to say that as a brown woman, it's not necessarily my job to teach white people. And that goes for all people of color. I think that if someone is disrespecting you while you're trying to have these conversations, dropping it and taking care of yourself, kind of like what Michelle was saying, I think is probably the most important part.
Yeah, recognizing, you both bring up a very important topic of recognizing a large part of the conversation is the willingness to have it. And like Michelle says, empathizing and understand where the other person is coming from first in order to gauge it and then move into it, I think is incredibly important as well. So thank you both for giving your insight on that. So that does bring up a certain, a strong question of like, what do we do if those people refuse to listen? And Nicci, you do touch on it, but like specifically in a school setting, what would your recommendation be to somebody who you try to engage them and tell them like that's not cool, but it doesn't seem to get to them? And this is for everyone.
I see that a lot. And for anybody within the last 2 weeks, I'm pretty sure you guys have seen it a lot too. And that's okay, right? There are ignorant people that we cannot fault. They just don't know. They didn't learn it in school. They didn't learn it from their parents. So sometimes they say things they genuinely didn't know, but they want to learn. And those are the people that we spend energy on. There's people that know, but don't care. They don't want to learn. There's this guy that I'm kind of dealing with right now who's a pastor. And every day he posts something super offensive. And we try to, me and a few other people have tried to, hey, just, here's some surface level information. Watch The 13th on Netflix. Watch The Hate U Give. Read Nikki Giovanni, read these books or something like that. Nah, I'm good. Right? I'm good. So they've already told you blatantly, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me enough for me to learn to try to change my perspective. So when you come across that, you have to understand there are people that want to learn. There are people that want to be allies. Like, yo, man, I listen to hip hop all the time. My YouTube is popping because of hip hop, right? I you know, I want to not only have that, you know, to credit that my success to, you know, these people who work hard on their craft, but also I want to learn so in times of need, I can be there for them. I can raise my voice. I can say these things. And there's some people that are just like, I don't care. And so don't waste your energy on those people. Okay. Sooner or later, well, and that's why I said we have to create an anti-racist culture, because there's always going to be those people. But if they feel comfortable not being in the know, right? If they feel comfortable not being in the know and not caring, then we're not making progress. But if they're just like, if they feel like an outlier, like, man, am I the only one that hasn't watched the 13th? Or am I the only one that doesn't understand A, B, and C? Then you start to, because people will change when they feel uncomfortable, right? People will start to, when their back's up against the wall and they don't feel like they fit in, they'll do what they can to try to fit in, which is learning. So don't waste energy on people that don't want to understand.
Right.
Oh, for sure.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Oh, I just want to add that, and if there's specific actions because they don't want to learn is affecting you directly, because we mentioned different scenarios, if it's, you know, friend to friend, or if it's friend to someone who's an elder to you or in a position of power above you, if that is specifically affecting you because of their reluctance to actually educate themselves and learn, then definitely climb up the chain of command, because I guarantee you that person that you're dealing with is not the person who's directly going to be impactful in terms of making all the decisions that are going on in your life. Because as a Black person, I can speak to the fact that there's been many times where I've had, you know, racist teachers. I've had, you know, I've dealt with racist people pretty much all of my life, because that's just, there's more racist people than there aren't. Just there you are going to find someone who will treat you in that way, but you don't, your responsibility is not to endure that. You don't have to sit there and be silent if that is directly affecting you, because it's not your responsibility to want to teach them if they don't want to learn, and it's not your responsibility to bear the emotional and mental abuse that comes with that, and the years of trauma that comes with trying to rationalize in your head someone else's irrationality. So if someone's dealing with you in that way and you want to, you know, remove yourself from the situation, absolutely remove it. If it's a friend to friend situation, remove yourself from the situation. You've done all you can. Remove yourself for your own self's sake. And if it's someone in a position of power or authority, climb up the chain, because by doing that and getting that person removed or dealt with, that's not just going to help you. That's going to help the other person who wasn't as vocal as you. That's going to help the other person who has to come along and deal with that same person, because now you've started the framework to get a culture of anti-racism. You've started that framework there because you dealt with the one situation that you felt you were prepared to deal with. So just wanted to put that out there.
And real quick, Jared, we have to understand, guys, that a lot of this racism is taught, right? Some people don't necessarily want to be racist or whatever, but it's taught. You know, your mom says, don't date a Black dude, right? And you kind of pass it off, ha ha, funny, but that was taught down through generation to generation, mom or great grandpa to grandpa, from grandpa to dad, from dad to son, from son to nephew, so that stuff is taught. And if it can be taught, right, and can be learned, it can be unlearned. But in order to unlearn racism, you have to learn racism, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. You got to decolonize this thing up here too, because like you guys all have mentioned, it starts when we're little and we live in it for our entire lives. So I want to mention we have about 3 minutes left. You have all been incredible, lovely speakers for us. Thank you so much again. And we wanted to get maybe 30 to 45 seconds from each of you, something of a note to end on of hope. Like, what do we want to look to the future to see? What does that place or this conversation look like 5-10 years down the line, and then we'll wrap it up. So I'll just go ahead and go down the line. I'll start with Nicci. Anything you'd like to end with?
Well, I will say that when I was at Walnut, I was not at all conscious. I was very racist and very hurtful. And I think that because I'm a brown woman, I thought that it was okay when it's not okay. And I'm God knows how many years out. And I studied political science, specifically within like social justice. I'm now on the board of a nonprofit that's trying to combat this with an education. I had no idea that I would be here at this point. And kind of like Dee was saying, I was also written off. I got suspended when I was in high school as well. Like, I really think that if I had to go back and tell myself where I am now, it would be a hopeful note, because I made it so far in my own understanding of my own racial identity and how that interacts with other people's. So I would say just continue to learn.
And you guys are so ahead of the game right now, going through high school and having these conversations. So there we go.
Absolutely. Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, I think I'll just say that I am very hopeful for the world that we are going to build together, a world where we can value safety, accountability, justice, and really this work is from cradle to grave. Like, anti-Blackness so urgently needs to be confronted right now, but this is work that is lifelong. And so I hope that we are building in sustainable practices as we are engaging with this work lifelong. And that we know that the world that we're building that is to come is probably not a world that we're going to live to see the full of, but how beautiful it is that we get to continue building upon the work of our ancestors and communities before us. To build something that we want future generations to be able to inhabit as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dee?
You know what? I encourage everyone to find out why you fear Blackness, right? Why is this inherent fear of Black, right? Change the dialogue. Each and every one of you guys could change. I mean, throughout history, Black magic, Black cats, Black this, Black that. We've been taught to fear Black, but what you learn and what you experience can be different, right? Hang out with us, befriend us, be with us. We're dope. We're cool people. I promise you. Trust me, right? And learn something new. For those of you in Walnut, I implore you guys to travel the world. Don't spend your money on, Jordans all the time or whatever y'all be buying nowadays. Travel the world, go to different countries, visit different people, and have this mindset that you'll at least try something, right? Whether it's food, whether it's anything, whether you listen to a different type of music, explore.
Awesome. Thank you so much. AJ?
I just want to say, just keep fighting the good fight. And I use the word fight because you are going to have pushback and you are actually dealing with an actual enemy. And the enemy may not always be a person. In fact, the enemy in itself is an idea. So you're going to have to combat that with other ideas that are better and an ideology that's looking towards the future. I can speak for myself that I've been in Walnut for the past 22 years. And I just went to one of the Black Lives Matter protests that was held on Amar. And that was something that was very inspirational to see because I saw so many faces from Walnut fighting for me, fighting for people that looked like me who dealt with, police brutality, police injustice, but all the things that go along with that. But just saying that Black Lives Matter, getting to that point, seeing that was inspirational. And I saw so many faces from Walnut do that. So I just want to say thank you for that. Because you guys are educating yourselves. You guys are in a great position and a great time to be alive, because hopefully this will be enough for you guys to say that we're not going to do it the same way that generations before us were taught to do, because we can see the difference. So I just got to say, just keep doing that. Keep fighting that good fight. Like Dee said, hang out with us. We're not scary people. We're not at all. And if you ever have a chance to see something, one of the things that struck me, if you ever read something and find out that your ideology was wrong, acknowledge that, correct your life. I think Nicci said this, right? Yeah, correct it and continue to move forward. And if you're not Black, continue to be an ally, like Michelle said, because amplifying the voices of the unheard, of the people that sit at the bottom of the barrel, that will come back up to help you move forward, because every single one of us is dealing with the same virus that's going on. And by educating ourselves on what to do to fix it, on what to do to help everybody move forward, that's the point. You have to start, you have to move, you have to do something, you have to have an actionable thing. It's more than just a post. It's definitely more than just a black square, and it's going to exist long after Juneteenth and long after February of next year. You have to continue to educate yourself and move forward to allow yourself not to make the same mistakes that have been made. So that's it. Just keep fighting. Good fight.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much again for giving your time and your energy to have this discussion with us and to be an inspiration in this time. And thank you for everybody who came to listen. It was fantastic to see so many people show support for such a great discussion and a great conversation. The last of my notes say that you are more than welcome to come to our next talk. It will be next Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. and the topic will be on activism and change. But that's it from us. Thank you guys all for joining us, and we will see you next time.